welcome to the AMTA 2021 National Conference Research Poster Session. And thank you for coming by our poster. My name is Bill Matney, and I am representing a cohort of researchers who have completed a study called The Use of Percussion in Music Interventions, a Realist Synthesis Systematic Review. This type of systematic review focuses on building theory through a set of three concepts. Those concepts are context, mechanism, and outcome. These are three components that occur in any intervention process, but it's important for me to break them down here to give you a little better understanding. So a context can be understood as the ways in which a client or participant and a clinician are situated prior to and during the intervention process. This can include demographics, minor everyday events, but also prior experiences, structure and systems, culture, agency and autonomy, and the relationships that already exist. An outcome is obviously the particular intention as related to a domain of health change that occurs or does not occur through an intervention process where context and mechanisms interact. The most complex of these three concepts obviously is the mechanism, and there have been some writings about mechanisms in our field. For our purposes, we are describing a mechanism as the ways that people respond to resources, particular types of engagements, and or relationships within an intervention process. Mechanisms are nonlinear and emergent, but are the generative cause of change. So a realist synthesis does believe that there is cause and effect, but it's a very complex cause and effect that occurs. This particular study is looking obviously at percussion use, which is something that I'm very passionate about and was excited to work with a team on. I initially started this as my dissertation by myself and decided to not exactly begin again, but redo the process with a team, so I'd have greater rigor, added perspectives, and hopefully a more fruitful process. The use of percussion is very common in our field, and it's something I've studied for a while, but I haven't studied it this way, where in the past I've looked at how and why percussion is used in our field. This study allowed us as a team to assess how and why percussion is used to success or to lack of success. And as you can guess, percussion is used in so many different ways and to so many different degrees. We can have a percussion intervention that is solely based on that percussion use, but we can also have music interventions that are just using a little bit of percussion somewhere. So that creates also a great level of complexity. The purpose of this study was to build theory in order to better understand how and why percussion use in music interventions worked or did not work in certain situations by locating context, mechanisms, and outcomes and the interactions between them. In order to do this, we went through a systematic review process guided by Prisma and by a set of guidelines called Ramsey's, which is specific to realist synthesis. You can see on the poster a flow chart which describes the specific countdown of studies as based in inclusion and exclusion criteria. Our filtering process resulted in 48 studies to be analyzed, and from there we looked at creating a large Google spreadsheet that would allow us to build subcomponents for context, mechanism, and outcome. So for example, subcomponents of context could include population demographics, number of participants in a study, location of study to whatever degree discussed, information about support staff outside of the study, healthcare delivery model, information about the environment with which the study occurred, and of course that means location, etc. Extra information on researchers and interventionists, systems and structures, and so on. Intervention and mechanism subcomponents could include things like music instruments, any details about the characteristics of music being used, such as tempo, rhythmic phrasing, dynamics, so on and so forth. The music therapy methods being used, related details regarding percussion and the particular experiences, theoretical functions of percussion as noted in prior theory, music intervention reporting that detail those things that happen between the interventionist and participant, and so on and so forth. And then obviously outcomes are going to be those health domains that are being affected either as noted through a randomized controlled trial and the clinical effectiveness or laboratory efficacy of that, or in the case of other types of studies using qualitative methods, the personal or social impact that is described by the experiences of the clients. This large spreadsheet gave us something to begin with, but going through the articles allowed us to iterate and to create more subcomponents as needed. Once we completed our information in the large Google spreadsheet, we sought to distill the information into more bite-sized chunks, into what could be called individual context mechanism outcome configuration summaries for each individual study. And some examples of these individual CMOCs are also available on the poster. Once we created these distilled CMOCs for individual studies, we wanted to see if there were areas where some studies were similar enough to potentially build theory across studies. So we created chains of inference through some figures, and there's one example on the poster which is related to the emotional domain. If you look down and see an anxiety reduction in the medical setting, there are a few studies with which we were able to put together a proposition that showed some similarity between these studies and allows us to potentially build some theory related to anxiety reduction in the medical setting. These chains of inference also allow one to see what studies, even if only an individual situation that can't be combined with another study, you're still able to find a particular citation related to that and would be able to go through the individual CMOCs and glean some information that way. The last figure on the study is a general initial rough program theory, or IRPT, to help inform broader theory as we move forward on percussion use in music interventions and seek to better understand how they work. In this particular figure, concepts related to context, delivery logistics, instrumentation, music experiences, percussion experiences, music characteristics, broad therapeutic functions of percussion, clinician interactions and processes, mechanizing actions, and mechanisms, as well as outcomes, are described for the broader picture. Understanding this information can be useful for us in the future because it can allow, for example, me to take a particular chain of inference, put the materials together, review them in a way that I might be able to develop a stronger intervention process and test it over time, assess its effectiveness, and then in that way contribute to theory again and detail it further. It also allows us to know what we haven't studied, where we lack some detail in particular studies and may need to restudy something. It can allow for replication in particular areas that we know we may not have that yet. It can also allow us to isolate particular mechanisms and create new studies regardless of the methodology that we choose to assess the effectiveness and success or a lack of success in a process. So that in a nutshell is this team's research process. Of course, a poster is just not big enough to put all of the 14 tables and figures that would be beneficial, but hopefully this gives you a snapshot of our process. We're excited to share it with you, and we thank you for coming by.